We're going to be in Proverbs chapters 16 and 17 today, and pretty much just ignore the chapter divisions because we're going to start partway into chapter 16 because we did the first part of chapter 16 last week since it was part of a whole collection, and we'll also do a little bit into chapter 18 as well. But mostly we're going to be in chapters 16 and 17 today. But before that, quick summary of what we covered in the last few weeks of this study. First, we started off with the background of Proverbs. It's written mostly by Solomon, basically chapters 1 to 22, 24, all written by Solomon. And we have a couple other authors in the book of Proverbs. First of all, we see some editors on the book of Proverbs, chapter 25, verse 1. These also are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied or transcribed. And we also have Augur in Proverbs chapter 30, verse 1, the words of Augur, son of Jacob, the oracle. And we also have Proverbs chapter 31, verse 1, the words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. So this isn't some guesswork or speculation or anything like that. We see specifically, explicitly, some different authors here and there in the book of Proverbs. We also have the editors, and assuming that the men of Hezekiah in chapter 25 verse 1 are the last people to have a hand in the book of Proverbs, and we can take them as the editors of this collection who put, Solomon's Proverbs in along with Augur and King Lemuel, and put all that together, kind of organized things as well, maybe wrote in some little titles here and there, such as these are the Proverbs of Solomon that we see in chapter 10 verse 1, chapter 1 verse 1, at the very beginning, introducing all of this and what we're looking at. If we take them to be the last people who had a hand in the book of Proverbs, we're looking at a dated around 700 BC or so, whenever Hezekiah was running around and he had his men running around too. So that's the kind of date that we're looking at, and that's pretty much the background. We're also looking at why we included Proverbs in the Bible, simply because Jesus affirmed the book of Proverbs. In the first century, there were three major categories for the Hebrew Bible. You had the law, books of Moses. You had the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, all the minor prophets as well. And you also had the writings category, of which Psalms was a major part of, but also Proverbs was an integral part of the writings category. And Jesus affirmed all three of those categories, so he affirmed Proverbs as well. So we get into chapter 1, verses 1 to 7 begin the introduction. And verse 7 is the motto. But in verses 2 to 6, we also see the purpose of Proverbs, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction, to give prudence to the simple. So that tells us a little hint of who the audience, the intended audience for the book of Proverbs is. Maybe the general, universal audience, knowledge and discretion to the youth, let the wise hear, and so on. And verse 7 gives us the motto of Proverbs: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, fools despise wisdom and instruction. Verse 20 starts off with the first time we see a personification of wisdom. Wisdom's crying out in the streets. She's raising her voice, and she's inviting people to listen to her. Chapter 2 tells us about the value of wisdom. Chapter 3, trusting in the Lord with all your heart, leaning not on your own understanding. Chapter 4, more of a father's instruction. Well, that's the whole theme of chapters 1 to 9 of Proverbs, where you'll see a lot of, my son, heed my instruction. My son, listen to this. My son, don't do that. So it's a father's instruction. Solomon takes this fatherly role throughout chapters 1 to 9. And we see some longer discourses. Another theme is warning against adultery, specifically the adulteress that Solomon is warning his audience about. He also gives some other warnings, some practical warnings with finances, with work, more against adultery, more against the adulteress. Chapter 8 gives us the major section on the personification of wisdom. This is the biggest part of that. And specifically verses 22 to 31, we see some interesting passages where it says that the Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work. This is wisdom speaking, whoever or whatever wisdom is. Ages ago I was set up at the first before the beginning of the earth. When there was no depths, I was brought forth. I was beside him like a master workman. And in addition to a passage from 1 Corinthians, which says that Christ is the power and wisdom of God, there are people who believe that Proverbs in chapter 8 here, the passage that we just read, is actually alluding to or prophesying the Son of God, or the Logos of God here. So that's definitely an option. We looked at some of the issues with that, but some people still hold to that we are talking about the Son of God in Proverbs chapter 8 as the personification of wisdom. It wouldn't be the personification of wisdom. Wisdom would be like a kind of a symbol or a representation, some kind of allusion to the Son of God. The other option, of course, is that we're just talking about a personification of wisdom as either an attribute of God or some kind of abstract concept or virtue of wisdom instead of referring to the Son of God. Those are the two main options there. Chapter 9, we have the invitation of wisdom. She's built her house, hewn her 7 pillars. She's prepared a feast for everyone to partake of the wisdom, and she's inviting them, calling them off the streets. And on the other hand, verses 13 to 18, at the end of that chapter 9, we have the woman of folly, who is also inviting people to partake of her feast. So you have to watch out, be careful. And then chapters 10 to 22, 24, depending on where you want to divide that. This talks about the Proverbs of Solomon, but as before, chapters 1 to 9, we got longer discourses, easier to categorize, easier themes. And now chapters 10 to 22, 24, we get the short, pithy sayings that we're more familiar with of Proverbs talking about. They can kind of stand on their own, whereas beforehand, you could see very strong correlation with the context very easily. But now we get these short, pithy sayings that have been difficult to categorize, but we've been doing our best in that. And one way to categorize them, which I think works quite nicely, is this little chart here. Well, it's not really a chart, but these different structures, which our commentator calls collections in the book of Proverbs. Now, we went through these collections before, but if you're new, we'll review them. So there are several types of collections in the book of Proverbs. You have parallel collections, which are proverbs grouped in an A-B-A-B pattern, which means that you have one topic, let's call it topic A, and then you have a different topic, let's call that topic B, and then you repeat that pattern. So it goes A, B, A, B. We just goes on to talk about those different topics in that order. You can also bring in topic C or topic D. And then number 2, you have a chiastic collection, which is an A-B-B-A pattern. So instead of repeating the order from A-B, you just repeat that and go A-B again. Instead of doing that, you reverse the order in the second half. So you go A-B, reverse the order, then you talk about B-A, those different topics. Then you have number 3, a catchword collection, which is a collection grouped with a different phrase or the same phrase or word. That's kind of a catchword for that section. That's just been repeated throughout the section. And you know that, okay, we're talking about one whole unit here, if that's a catchword is repeated like that. Number 4, a thematic collection. Here you have a common theme throughout that collection. So if you have a whole section, let's say, just for example's sake, verses 5 to 10 talk about kings and nations or something like that, then you know that you're probably looking at a thematic collection and you can kind of group that together. Number 5, an inclusio collection. An inclusio is a bookend where you have at the beginning a certain word or phrase or topic, and at the end you have the same word, phrase, or topic, and everything from the start to the end that's been bookended like that, all of that and all the middle is included in that one collection, an inclusio collection. So those are the 5 main types of collections in Proverbs. We'll see some areas in chapter 16 to 17 where Solomon kind of gets a little more unique than from what we've seen. That doesn't perfectly fall into those categories, but they provide a good basis for us in this study. So if you want to be reading, just go ahead and react to the message. Looks like there are old reactions there, so I'll remove those. So react to the Bible Study React message over there if you want to be called on to read specifically. And I'll go ahead and send, while we're waiting for reactions, I'll send you guys the structural diagram for this next section that we'll look at, Proverbs 16 and 17. So you can go ahead and open that up if you want. It'll help because we will be using that. You can open that up, you can save it. And let's see if anyone's reacted yet. We have one reaction, Capybara Man. Alright, let's see the first collection, which is, since we did verses 1 to 8 last week, that was all part of a big section that started in chapter 15, we're actually going to start at verse 9 today in chapter 16. So we have a very big section that has smaller sections in it. So if you open up the structural diagram, you'll see that I have collection 1, collection 2, collection 3 at the top, and then I have a long line on the right, and I'm calling this an AB envelope. And an AB envelope is where you have your whole section, you have multiple collections in that, but at the beginning of each collection, you have a common word, phrase, or theme, and at the end of each collection, you have a common word, phrase, or theme. So it's not just an inclusio, it's 3 inclusios here. You could have 2 inclusios or 4 or whatever, but they all kind of line up together. So just pay attention to the first verse of each of those collections, each 3 of those, and the last verse, and you'll kind of understand. But we will get to that. So Dogman, this is a big section, but could you read verses 9 of chapter 16 all the way to chapter 17, verse 1?
Sure. I'm reading from the NASB 1995. The mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Divine decision is in the lips of the king. His mouth should not err in judgment. A just balance and scales belong to the Lord. All the weights of the bag are his concern. It is an abomination for kings to commit wicked acts, for a throne is established on righteousness. Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and he who speaks right is loved. The fury of a king is like messengers of death, but a wise man will appease it. And the light of a king's face is life, and his favor is like a cloud with the spring rain. How much better it is to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding is to be chosen above silver. The highway of the upright is to depart from evil. He who watches his way preserves his life. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before stumbling. It is better to be humble in spirit with the lowly, than to divide the spoil with the proud. He who gives attention to the word will find good, and blesses he who trusts in the Lord. The wise in heart will be called understanding, and sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. Understanding is a fountain who has it, but the discipline of fools is folly. The heart of the wise instructs his mouth, and adds persuasiveness to his lips. Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. There is a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. A worker's appetite works for him, for his hunger urges him on. A worthless man digs up evil, while his words are like scorching fire. A perverse man spreads strife, and a slanderer separates intimate friends. A man of violence entices his neighbor, and leads him in a way that is not good. He who winks his eyes does so to devise perverse things. He who compresses his lips brings evil to pass. A gray head is a crown of glory. It is found in the way of righteousness. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who captures a city. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. Better, in chapter 17, better is a dry morsel and quietness with it than a house full of feasting with strife.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, for these collections, if we are talking about an AB envelope, all the first verses should be on a similar topic or theme, and all the last verses should be as well. Now, the first verse is a little more difficult to tell, but I just want to show this real quickly. So look at the last verse of all of those collections. What's common between those last verses? So this would be verses 19, verse 32, and chapter 17, verse 1.
Sorry, you said, what chapter are we in again?
Oh, we're in chapter 16 and chapter 17, verse 1.
Okay, so. And you're talking about specifically verses 1 to 9, you said?
Verse 19, 32, and then 1. It's all on the diagram, but I'll try to paste it in the chat.
Oh, I tried to do it for you. Is that the right one?
All right. Let me see.
Oh.
So yeah, just keep looking and let me know when you find out what's common between these. This is an easy one. It might be too easy for you guys.
I am listening, but I am also making food, so...
Oh yeah, Matt's making food. So those are the 3 verses there. Simple question though. What's common?
Someone else must take my place as the highly actively participating one. I'll do it. So you're saying from 19 to 32, we're trying to look to see what the connection is? Oh, you posted it
All
down
3.
there, okay.
Yep, all 3 of them.
Oh, yeah, you made it easier. Okay, there you go. It seems the connection that I see is it is better. So it is better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide spoil with the proud. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty. Wait, yeah, I think so. And he rules the spirit and he takes a city.
Yeah, you got it already,
Try more small. Yeah, okay. Well, you've taught us to look so deeply. It's like,
yeah.
No, this is too easy.
Yeah, that's what I was worried. Some of you guys were going way too deep in there. Some of you already saw it, but you're like, nah, this is too easy. I'm not even going to answer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just looking for that one word. Just that one word, better. And this is a common type of proverb you'll see in the book of Proverbs. And generally I've seen in commentaries that they just call them better proverbs. Just in quotes. This is a better proverb because it has the word better in it. And it has that kind of style to it. It's better to be this than this. And that's what we see common in verse 19, 32, and verse 1. So this is another note to just kind of ignore all the chapter divisions in the book of Proverbs. The verse divisions, though, do a very good job, but the chapter divisions kind of aren't that good. But we see that. And welcome new people. If you've just joined, we're looking at a diagram right now. So if you scroll up in the Study VC chat up to this, I'll just paste it down here again. But just scroll up to that, where the link is, download that, open it up. You'll probably have to zoom in quite a bit, all the way at the top. But I have verses 9 of chapter 16 to chapter 17, verse 1, labeled as an AB envelope, which means that the beginning verses of all 3 of those collections, collections 1, 2, and 3, should all be similar, and the last verses should all be similar as well. So we looked at the last verses first because I thought that would be easier to see, and we see better in verse 19. We see better in verse 32, and we see better in verse 1 of chapter 17. So that's the connection there. All the ends of those collections are similar. And now we have to look at the beginning of those verses. So that would be verse 9 of chapter 16, verse 20, and verse 33. So let me paste those again. Just maybe that'll make it easier. So Proverbs 16:9 is the beginning of collection 1. Proverbs 16:20 is the beginning of collection 2. And Proverbs 16:33 is the beginning of section or collection 3. So what is similar? What's the connection between those 3 verses that start off each collection? What do you guys think?
Oh, me, pick me.
Go ahead, Matt.
Let's see. It seems to be emphasizing. No, let me see. Okay, so it. I don't know if this is the right answer, but it seems to be emphasizing a. So, for example, I have to say it this way: the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. That's 33. Then 20. Whoever gives thought to the word will discover good, and blessed is he who trusts the Lord. Right. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. I don't know if I can exactly see the connection, other than the fact that they all 3 end with talking about the Lord, and all 3 put the Lord as supreme in the context of whatever's being talked about.
Yeah, especially that last part. The Lord is supreme in all of these things. So man is doing something. He's planning his way, or he's giving thought to the word and discovering good, or man is having the lot cast into his lap. But the Lord establishes his steps. But blessed is he who trusts in the Lord. But its every decision is from the Lord. And, that trust, kind of hinted at that in our prayer earlier, but that trust has to do with God's wisdom, God's plan, and things like that. So that is what we're all talking about. We're talking about man doing something over here, but God is sovereign. And I would say that would be the connection between those 3 verses there. So as you can see, we have connections between the last verses. All those talk about better things. Those are the better proverbs. And we have connections here in the beginning of those collections. So that's how we have an AB envelope here, which gives us one whole huge section, but it's kind of broken up into 3 different collections. Any questions on that? Okay, I will assume no questions. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Is there any purpose to it being structured in these different, not complicated, but somewhat cryptic, puzzling, advanced? I don't know. In these interesting ways. Why wasn't it just kind of like put out like a very systematic list of here's all of the things I have to say about this topic, and here's the ones about this? Or organized in some different fashion? Why do you think it kind of took the poetic and almost mysterious A, B, B, A, all this stuff? Why do you think it went this direction? What do you think the Lord's purpose is in that?
That's a good question. That I can't tell you explicitly, but I do have some hints, perhaps, about why that is. Number one, though, you mentioned it was a bit cryptic, and yeah, it feels cryptic, especially to us. But in Hebrew poetry, Hebrew parallelism, where they are familiar with all of these structures, it would not be as cryptic. Now, it might feel a little subtle, and you have to kind of really dig deep in there to get the collection that the author is trying to convey, but they would know what to look for. They wouldn't have to have a commentary snippet every beginning of their studies. They would already kind of know what to look for. They'd be familiar with all these different parallelisms and collections. So it wouldn't be as cryptic to them, first off. And I would say that putting it in these different collections enables you to bring out a lot more and force you to look deeper into things. The goal of Proverbs is to impart wisdom. At least one of the goals is to impart wisdom onto the audience. But it doesn't just want to plainly give you wisdom. It also wants you to work for wisdom. It tells you to search it out as silver. And not only does it want you to work for that wisdom, I think it also trains you for wisdom as well. When you're interpreting Proverbs, you have to use some common sense. You have to use some general principles. You have to look at the world around you to see where such and such a proverb would apply and where it wouldn't apply. So not just giving you wisdom plain and simple, it's also training you to be wise. And in the beginning, in the intro, another goal of Proverbs was to help you discern the words of wisdom, to help you understand riddles and puzzles and things like that. And the way that these collections work is that they're kind of laid out like puzzles, right? We looked at it, okay, what does this first verse say? What's the connection between these verses? It's kind of like a puzzle. It's kind of like a riddle. And in that way, we grew a little bit in our wisdom as we continued to study these things. And another thing that you mentioned was that, okay, why doesn't the author just group everything by topic? Okay, here are all the verses about kings in this topic. Here are all the verses about fearing the Lord in this section. And then we just have everything grouped nice and systematically into topics. And one reason I've read from a commentary on why everything's kind of interspliced, you'll see some verses about kings here, and then many chapters later, you might see some kings mentioned again, for instance. And one reason for this is that it brings out a almost random repetition, but the key there is repetition, where you hear about one topic, and then you continue reading Proverbs. A couple chapters later, maybe a couple days later, you see the same topic come up again. And that is one of the best ways to learn, where you get something repeated to you. And that's how Proverbs is laid out, where you see these topics being repeated. Such as in chapters 1 to 9, you see the adulteress, but it's not all in one chapter. It's throughout chapters 1 to 9. The adulteress appears here. A couple chapters later, it appears again. And that repetition helps reinforce all of these concepts and helps you remember the concepts. So those are some of the hints that I've gotten as to why Solomon has organized things this way. And perhaps the men of Hezekiah had a hand in organizing this section. Probably not. It was most likely all Solomon organizing this. The men of Hezekiah probably had more of a hand in chapter 25 and onward. But Solomon organized this most likely. And those are some of the reasons I can kind of see as to why that is.
Well, it's really good. I especially like the one where you were saying, it reminded me of the proverb, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter and the honor of kings to search it out. That idea that these proverbs are presented in a way that the foolish will remain foolish, but those who are simple but yet wise, or simple but righteous, who are seeking, who are looking and reading and wanting to apply it to their lives, they'll pick up on these messages, they'll pick up on these nuances, if you will, and kind of like digging for treasure. It's hidden from those who don't care, and those who do care, they dig for it and they find it. And I think that idea of practically thinking, considering, applying, that's all within the context of being wise. We need to consider our actions. We need to apply scripture. So to have the book of Proverbs be training you and teaching you how to be wise in the way you read it is really, I think, ironic, and I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I also want to point out, though, that you don't have to immediately see all the collections. Oh yeah, that's an AB envelope, right? You don't have to immediately see all that in order to get things out of Proverbs, right? In order to understand most of it and get a lot out of Proverbs. I just want to make that clear, right? Don't just go, I can't see those AB envelopes on my own, I'm just going to give up studying Proverbs. Don't go like that. Just keep studying it, and resources will help. You can get all of these on your own through really intensive study, which could be fun. Just pick a chapter, start trying to lay all these connections out. That could be really fun, but don't get discouraged either. You can still get a lot out of Proverbs. And the way that this section is laid out is that you can still glean a lot from a singular proverb just by itself, even if you can't see the connections between all the collections that it might be in. So that's just what I wanted to give you a little side note there for everyone. Alright, let's get to the next section. We're going to keep going. For the last collection, though, I think we'll spend a little more time on, but we'll try to get through these fairly quickly. So, Dogman, could you please read verses 2 to 8? And could someone else react to the message too? Or just say that you want to read, so it's not just poor Dogman. But whenever you're ready, Dogman. Verses 2 to 8, chapter 17.
Alright. No worries. Alright, it's still NASB 9095. A servant who acts wisely will rule over a son who acts shamefully, and will share in the inheritance among brothers. The refining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests hearts. An evildoer listens to wicked lips. A liar pays attention to a destructive tongue. He who mocks the poor taunts his maker. He who rejoices at calamity will not go unpunished. Grandchildren are the crown of old men, and the glory of sons is their fathers. Excellent speech is not fitting for a fool, but much less are lying lips to a prince. A bribe is a charm in the sight of its owner. Wherever he turns, he prospers.
Alright. So, Solomon's basically throwing us a fast one here. And there isn't too much structure going on here. And our commentary just labels it as random proverbs. Now, there are some connections that you can kind of see. You might be able to see a hint of an inclusio. You might be able to see some kind of different, very vague connections going on. Maybe we're talking about some kind of inheritance, perhaps going through this, some kind of monetary thing where we're talking about an inheritance or silver, gold. We're talking about a grandfather here, a bribe. So you might see some vague connections there. There's nothing too strong though. But the connections are such that we can still group this together as one collection, but we can't really label it very exactly as far as our categories go. And that's fine. You know, poetry, Hebrew and modern poetry, any kind of poetry, they break the mold a lot. You have free-form poetry, for instance, that tries not to adhere to many molds. It still tries to adhere to things like rhythm and meter as far as English poetry goes. But sometimes you just gotta break the mold, be unique, all that good stuff. It's still a collection though. We can kind of hold that together very loosely. Let's get to the next section. This is another big one where you'll see on the right, instead of an AB envelope, we have parallel or chiastic collections. And I'll bring this out a little more explicitly later on, but we have basically 4 collections, but they're kind of grouped together because they're either in parallel or they're in chiasms. So it kind of separates them from the other collections before and after, and we can kind of group them together. So let's see. Still Dogman. Does anyone else want to read? This is a big section though. Anyone else want to read?
I would. I'm still eating though.
Okay.
It's alright.
Alright, Dogman. Verses 9 to 26 of chapter 17.
Okay. He who conceals a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates intimate friends. A rebuke goes deeper into one who has understanding than 100 blows into a fool. A rebellious man seeks only evil, so a cruel messenger will be sent against him. Let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs, rather than a fool in his folly. He who returns evil for good, evil will not depart from his house. The beginning of strife is like letting out water, so abandon the quarrel before it breaks out. He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous, both of them alike are an abomination to the Lord. Why is there a price in the hand of a fool to buy wisdom, when he has no sense? A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. A man lacking in sense pledges and becomes guarantor in the presence of his neighbor. He who loves transgression loves strife. He who raises his door seeks destruction. He who has a crooked mind finds no good, and he who is perverted in his language falls into evil. He who sires a fool does so to his sorrow, and the father of a fool has no joy. A joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. A wicked man receives a bribe from the bosom to pervert the ways of justice. Wisdom is in the presence of the one who has understanding, but the eyes of a fool are on the ends of the earth. A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her who bore him. It is not good. It is also not good to find the righteous, nor to strike the noble for their uprightness.
All right. So that is the second to last collection that we'll look at. And I'll just give you the commentary snippet there to show you the different chiasms and parallels going on, because things can kind of get a little crazy there. So collection 1, verses 9 to 13, we have an A, B, C, B, A pattern. And what kind of pattern is that? I ask you guys, what pattern is that? What collection? So you can scroll up if you need to, or if you want to, that's fine. Where I brought in the other screenshot with all the 5 types of collections. Let me just paste it again. There, so you got that. Out of that list of 5, which one is it? That first one, collection 1.
Oh, here, give me a second.
Yes, Dogman said chiastic. Sorry, Matt. He beat you to the punch.
Hey!
But yeah, chiastic collection.
Oh. Okay. Because it says grouped in like A, B, B, A pattern, but this is like...
Yeah,
it's in
you have
A,
a C
B,
now.
C, D, A. Ah, okay, it threw me off. Okay. Alright, good
Yeah,
dog.
so that's another thing to note. The collections listed in the 5 categories, they're just giving you the general kind of structure, but sometimes you could have other letters thrown in there.
Alright.
So yeah, A, B, C, and then you reverse the order, B, A. Chiastic collection. How about collection number 2? What kind of collection is that?
Mm-hmm.
Don't let the letters throw you off here.
Yeah, okay. Is it an inclusio?
Yes, it's an inclusio. And Dogman says inclusio too. So yeah, you see quarrels in verse 14 and quarrels in verse 19. And the rest, we don't really see any parallelism going on in C, D, D, D. And he uses the letters throughout all of this all the letters are the same in all of this. So it's not, we're talking about one different thing here, we're talking about one different thing there. Now if you see the letter A, because it's all part of the larger collection, if you see A there when we're talking about quarrels, this is related to collection 1's A, where we talk about gracious forgiveness. We talk about irrational retaliation, which is what quarrels are. But on the other hand, you shouldn't be quarreling, you shouldn't be retaliating, you should be graciously forgiving. So that's how all the letters work out, and that's how, even though we have separate collections, they're all grouped together in that one big collection that we saw in the diagram. So that's another connection here. And just to go through the other letters in collection 1, we start off with gracious forgiveness as opposed to quarreling. Letter B, the irrationality of a fool. Letter B again, the behavior of a fool. And letter C, just punishment carried out. And you also notice that if you do look at letter C elsewhere, such as in collection 4, you see perversion of justice and perversion of justice again. Whereas in collection 1, letter C, we're talking about just punishment. So that's how all the letters are kind of related in this one gigantic collection. And just to go a little quicker, collection 3, we have an inclusio, heart and tongue, verse 20, and heart and spirit, verse 22. Collection 4, we have another inclusio, perversion of justice, and perversion of justice. This could also be a chiasm as well, because we go in the pattern of C, B, then we reverse that order, B, C. So that could be a chiasm and an inclusio in collection 4. Alright, let's get to the last collection then. Has anyone else reacted? Or is it's still Dogman? Alright, Dogman. This will be the last reading though, so you're gonna be okay, I hope. So verse 27 of chapter 17 to chapter 18, verse 4.
Okay. All right. He who restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent. He who separates himself seeks his own desire. He quarrels against all sound wisdom. A fool does not delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own mind. When a wicked man comes, contempt also comes, and with dishonor comes scorn. The words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The fountain of wisdom is a bubbling brook. Did you say to verse 4?
Yeah, you just finished.
Okay.
All right. So that was the last collection there, and I've labeled it as an inclusio and perhaps a parallel. But what's the inclusio there? What's the connection between the first verse and the last verse?
I have to look at it. Which verses did you just read?
It's verses 27 to chapter 18:4. Let me just paste it.
Thank you. Oh, perfect. So you're saying, what is the connection between 27 to 4? Like all of that, or just...
Well, you could take all of it, but right now we're just looking at the first and last verses because it could be an inclusio.
That's true. Well, there's a connection, verse 27 to verse 4. It would be knowledge and wisdom. A knowledgeable person controls his tongue. Discerning person controls his temper. And in verse 4, the words of a man's mouth are deep water, a gushing torrent. Without to... Hold on.
Bless you.
Thank you. A fountain of wisdom. So we see knowledge, we see discernment, and then we see wisdom. So it's kind of a constant theme in Proverbs to talk of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, and the fear of the Lord. So it seems to me like the righteous man can, the topic of a righteous man in knowledge and wisdom could create a kind of brackets, so to speak, for all of this stuff in between to be contained.
Yeah.
Do you think I'm saying that correctly? Oh, okay.
Yeah, wisdom, knowledge, and also, to make a stronger connection there, we're talking about talking. Verse 27 controls his tongue. Verse 4, the words of a man's mouth.
Yes.
So yeah, I'd agree with all of that. The parallel is a little tougher to spot, so I'll just paste the structure of that. Oh, Dogman.
Okay.
So, man in verse 4 is wise. Verse 27 talks about how a man holds back his talking. Yeah, about talking. And he also made that connection there, which you should be. In inclusios, they're not separate things, but the man whose words are a fountain of wisdom is also a knowledgeable person who controls his tongue. And that also helps you balance things out, which is important in Proverbs, because if you just looked at verse 27, isolated it out of the collection completely, a knowledgeable person controls his tongue. A discerning person controls his temper. Oh, does that mean I should just be quiet and not say anything at all? Well, verse 4 kind of balances that out. The words of a man's mouth, a fountain of wisdom. So he is talking, he is doing stuff, he's saying stuff. He's not isolating himself either. So I just sent you a screenshot for the parallel that we're looking at. So we saw the inclusio, first and last verses. Now we're looking at the what's parallel between here. So it's kind of two structures in one collection. So we have A, the wise person's restrained use of words, and then we have A at the end, the wise person's words are profound. And that alone is just an inclusio, it's not a parallel. But we see BC in the middle there, which does give us a parallel. So B, silent fool, appears wise. Then we go to a different topic. A schismatic person is irrational, that's letter C. Then we go back to the fool in letter B. Then we go back to a base person is shameful, which makes that connection to a base person being a schismatic person. Alright, we're going to dive a little deeper into this particular verse. Glad you like it, Matt. So yeah, a little deeper into this passage, because I want to spend, at least in our studies, at least one collection that we kind of look at a little more closely. So we already saw the structure of this section, and again, just ignore the chapter breaks because they don't make much sense. It breaks it right in the middle of this whole collection there. But just ignore the chapter, just look at that section, and we're going to go ahead and try to interpret it, begin to at least. So verse 27, we're talking about a knowledgeable person. He's controlling his tongue, and a discerning person controls his temper. And you can look at this as another parallel. If you remember a couple weeks ago, we looked at the different cola in Proverbs. A colon is a single line, and a cola, or cola, is the plural of colon. So we're talking about multiple lines. A bicolon is two lines. So two lines by colon. You have two lines, they kind of go together. And most of Proverbs is made up of bicolons. So you can see that the verses do a great job, and you can also see the different lines as well. Some translations have short columns, so the lines don't quite match up. You have to look more at the punctuation. But here I kind of laid it out nice and simple, where you have line 1, verse 27, knowledgeable person. Line 2, a discerning person. And the way the parallelism works is that we might be talking about the same person. We most likely are. We're talking about a knowledgeable, discerning person who's controlling his tongue and his temper. Verse 28, and we get into letter B of the parallelism. We talk about the fool now. So we talk about the knowledgeable person, and now we're talking about a fool. If he stays silent, is thought to be wise. He who keeps his mouth shut can pass for smart, or can pass for intelligent. Verse 1 of chapter 18 now. He who separates himself indulges his desires and shows contempt for sound advice of any kind. This is letter C in our parallelism. We're talking about a different topic. We weren't talking about the knowledgeable person. We're not talking about a fool necessarily. We're talking about a different kind of person who could be foolish, but someone who separates himself, someone who isolates himself. And we see that this person is indulging his desires. He's showing contempt for sound advice of any kind. So while that's given to him, while that's available to him, he's ignoring all of that. He's separating himself from that and being selfish in doing so. Verse 2, a fool takes no pleasure in trying to understand. He only wants to express his own opinion. So we're back to letter B now. We're talking about the fool, that particular topic that we talked about in verse 28. Even a fool, if he stays silent. So verse 2, now we're expanding on the idea of a fool. What does a fool do? Well, he takes no pleasure in trying to understand. He only wants to express his own opinion. And in communication, if you're trying to listen to someone, you're trying to understand that person. And the opposite of trying to understand another person is, and listening to them, is expressing your own opinion and not bothering to understand or really listen to what the other person's saying. You just want to talk. You just want to express your own opinion, ignore everything else. And we can make a connection there with the previous verse where he's separating himself. He's being selfish. He wants to express his own opinion, and he's showing contempt for sound advice of any kind. He takes no pleasure in trying to understand. Verse 3, when a wicked person comes, contempt comes too, and with disdain comes provocation. Now this is an interesting one, because by itself, we can take that by itself and understand it pretty decently. Yeah, wicked people, they bring contempt, and with disdain comes provocation as well. But if we connect it a little closer to the whole context here, because I thought this was really good, let me just bring you out the commentary here. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. So this is just the little commentary snippet. And he says that instead of wickedness, in chapter 18, verse 3, one should translate it as a base person. A base person is someone who's selfish, someone who's contemptible and immoral, like Hat said, not adhering to ethical or moral principles. The point of the verse is concrete and not abstract. In context, this is not any kind of vice generally, but specifically obnoxious and vociferous behavior. When a base person enters a discussion, the atmosphere soon turns sour. And you've probably experienced this personally. If a base person runs in and he's schismatic, he's irrational. As far as verse 1 goes, chapter 18, he who separates himself indulges his desires and shows contempt for sound advice of any kind. As far as the parallel goes, verse 1 about the schismatic person, separation, isolation, that's letter C. And it also lines up with the wicked person in verse 3, or the base person in verse 3. So this person is isolationist, and in the context of being selfish, not the context of running off somewhere, not talking to anyone, but in the context of being selfish and only expressing his own opinion. So you can see that verse 3 helps us fill out this picture of a base person. If we looked at verse 1 only, we could be thinking of some kind of monk who's isolated himself from the world, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about someone who's only expressing his own opinion, and he's bringing provocation, he's bringing contempt and wickedness. You can't do that if you just don't talk to anyone or you separate yourself completely. You can't do that. So the whole collection kind of fills out this picture a little better, whereas if you isolated a certain proverb, you could easily get the wrong idea. And then finally, verse 4, we get back to the wise person, the knowledgeable person, letter A. So we went full circle around. That's what makes it an inclusio. Same letter A in the beginning, same letter A at the end. The words of a man's mouth are deep water, a gushing torrent, a fountain of wisdom. And in the context of this whole collection, it gives you the contrast between the wise person who controls his tongue and temper, between the person who is schismatic, who's bringing contempt and quarreling, and as well as contrasting that with the fool, too, who only wants to express his own opinion. He's not listening at all. He's not controlling his tongue. He's not understanding. He's just steamrolling the conversation, talking about what he wants to talk about in a very selfish, very isolationist kind of way where he's not listening to anyone else. He just wants it to be a one-man show where he has the platform. He's just looking for an audience to talk at, rather. Any thoughts on that last collection? Questions or comments?
I'll just say, I know we say it a lot, but thanks, Mark, for being so thorough in your teaching us of these different things. We really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you guys too. Thanks, Matt.
You're welcome. I'm digesting, so my brain is mostly full of food.
Gotcha. I didn't know that was how digestion worked. All right, I want to leave you guys with one last thing. And this is kind of just a general principle for interpreting Proverbs. I kind of mentioned it at the beginning. And even though collections help us kind of get everything into context where we know that we weren't talking about someone who just isolates himself from the world and doesn't talk to anyone. In the context of that collection, we were talking about a schismatic person who's coming into conversations, actually, and someone who's isolated himself can't do that. But in addition to that, you got to remember this general principle, and this commentary, which is by Tremper Longman, the third Tremper Longman, good Bible scholar. He says that Proverbs are not magical words that, if memorized and applied in a mechanical way, automatically lead to success and happiness. For example, if you raise up a child in the right way, he won't depart from it. And someone takes that proverb and looks at an unruly child and says, "Oh, you guys must not have raised that person up right." Well, not necessarily. So consider Proverbs 26, 7 and 9. It's a great example. A proverb in the mouth of a fool is as useless as a paralyzed leg. A proverb in the mouth of a fool is like a thorn bush brandished by a drunk. And the point of that is that Proverbs have application that you have to discern. You can't just go 100% every single time this proverb applies and will apply, so I will be happy, healthy, and so on and so forth. That's not the case. And we also see that in other Proverbs where, specifically Proverbs chapter 26, 4-5, which some people have looked at as a contradiction. There are some ancient rabbis who thought this was a contradiction. 26, 4-5 reads, "Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself." So it says, don't answer a fool according to his folly. And then verse 5 says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." That's a great example of how important it is to note that these are general principles and are not meant to be applied universally, mechanically to every single situation. Otherwise, you have a contradiction in verses 4 and 5, where it says, "Answer not a fool according to his folly." The very next verse says, "Answer a fool according to his folly." And the key to understanding that there is no contradiction there is to say that in the genre of Proverbs, you have to have discernment in when you apply a certain proverb, because it's not going to apply mechanically to 100% every single situation. Now, there are some bits and pieces of Proverbs that are universal, especially the things talking about what God has done, God's glory, and things like that. But when we're talking about most Proverbs, you have to have discernment. And that's why there is no contradiction in chapter 26. And if someone brings up the contradiction in 26, you can just bring out the other verses, the previous ones, 26, 7, and 9, where it says that a proverb in the mouth of a fool is as useless as a paralyzed leg. It'd still be nice, be charitable. But you got to be discerning when applying Proverbs. So any questions? That was just a general principle, kind of above and beyond our current study of the couple chapters. So yeah, Fang says, my interpretation has always been these were not prescriptions to begin with, specifically mechanical, 100% promises and prescriptions. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about that, it kind of makes sense, considering how much the Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, rather, includes this concept of considering your actions before you do them, and with knowledge and understanding and the fear of the Lord. Well, the fear of the Lord being that foundation, and what kind of knowledge, what kind of understanding and wisdom we have is a reverent wisdom and a reverent knowledge. We look at everything through that lens, but this knowledge, this understanding, and this fear of the Lord, it leads to wisdom, godly wisdom, and that helps us make choices. So, it makes sense that what is prescribed is not a one-size-fits-all, meticulously detailed situation, meticulously detailed answer. It's giving you the necessary tires to drive over all terrain. It is not giving you a set of tires for this terrain and for that terrain. It's saying, this generally is how immoral women work. This generally is what you should do. Flee. Don't partake. Don't go down her alley, her road, her street, her door. Just don't go that way. And death awaits you in one form or another if you do. And I think that's the purpose of Proverbs, if I'm honest, because it could say, it could be very, very meticulously theological, like Paul's letters, where he talks about the meticulous and beautiful intricacies of the gospel, salvation, grace, justification. He needs to define these. But in the book of Proverbs, for the case of wisdom, it needs to be addressed in more of we are presented with the equipment and we're given the responsibility to walk humbly and walk reverently with the Lord, and to apply what we learn and the methods that we learn, if that even is the correct word, method. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I like the illustration you gave about the wheels and things like that. And I would definitely agree that that is how Proverbs is meant to be understood, not mechanically 100% every single way and time, because life is messy. There are exceptions to certain circumstances, and there are a virtual infinity of possibilities and possible circumstances and situations and motivations and intentions and everything like that. So you have to be discerning and wise. Even though you have general principles, a lot of general principles, you still have to discernfully apply those. And I think I misunderstood what Fang was saying to begin with. He's still typing, so maybe he's trying to fix that. But I think I misunderstood what Fang was saying. It looks like he's saying that 26, 4-5 were not prescriptions to begin with, not meant to be followed at all, perhaps. I don't know, but we can get to that when we get to chapter 26, and in general too. Okay, there he says. Meant more like my interpretation in these verses was more like, if you were not to answer a fool according to his folly, you will not be like him, and if you answer a fool according to his folly, he will think himself wise. Descriptive statements about what occurs. So perhaps they might be conditionals instead. That is an option. I'm not sure. I do think it would be better to keep them as prescriptions, but you can certainly look at them as conditionals if we go ahead and study them more. We will in chapter 26. So yeah, keep that in mind for as we keep on going. When we get to chapter 26, we'll specifically look at those proverbs. I just wanted to bring them out today because they bring up some important concepts for us. All right, I think we've pretty much did a great study, had a good one, pretty much finished it up. And
Yeah.
Dogman, still the only one, but I'll spare him. So I'll just close this out with a word of prayer. Let's bow our heads in reverence. Oh, go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the generosity of Mark and others who study and share and teach these things without charge and without donation or anything. They just freely give unto us. So thank you, Lord, for Dogman and Mark and all the others, and for the love and the freedom and generosity of these teachings we've been taught of how to study Proverbs, understand it, and how to better follow you, and to love you with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind and all our strength. Thank you for helping us love you with all that we are. Thank you, Father. I pray that you would help us to grow in wisdom, grow in the fear of the Lord. That we would grow in these things so that we can follow you and honor you through reverent lives, through pure lives, through integrity, through righteousness, through the principles that you've laid out in the book of Proverbs. May our lives bring you glory. Thank you. And we give you all the glory. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.